Hello, I'm William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and in recent weeks I've been walking parents through some videos that are posted on YouTube in which different people and organizations talk about classical education. And I've provided a handful of red flags to watch out for in what I call the fake classical education movement, which has been developing since the 1990s. And in this video, I'd like to take a look at something different, but the same. And it's a program that's called Hillsdale Academy, and it's an organization that claims to promote classical education. And I may actually look at a couple videos from this organization because I'd like to highlight, and I'm sure I've highlighted it clearly enough already in previous critiques, but I'd like you to watch this video and ask yourself, what is the substance of classical education? When do we actually learn what classical education is? Or is it just assumed that everyone already knows what classical education is? What exactly are we getting if we enroll in a school like this? Is there any connection to the past? Is there any continuity? How does this education actually relate to the Catholic life and to what we know about the Catholic faith and the way of perfection modeled for us by Christ and the saints? What does this have to do with historic Christian education? Why is it called classical? I'd like you to ask questions like that as we go and look through the marketing, look through the personal testimonies, look through the spectacle of the real slick video presentation and all the video editing and effects. Look beyond all that and ask, what is the actual substance of what's being presented here? What is a classical education? And I want you to ask that because I want you to become conscious of the rhetorical appeal to emotions that's present in this whole movement. Remember, Aristotle believed that emotional appeals should be avoided. He argued that emotional appeals are part of the method of false teachers, and that in order for us to have a society that's true and wise, we have to strip it of distractions, strip it of ambiguities, and address the truths simply and clearly. That was the whole point of Aristotle's art of reasoning. So as we watch this video, I'd like you to answer the question, what exactly is this education that they're talking about? Why is it assumed to already be known and understood? And what are they really doing here? What is the real point of this video? So we're going to watch this together. Look for the red flags that I've talked about. Some of them won't be present in this because this is more of a modern school in its arrangement. But watch for the misuse of historic terms that are taken from their original context and used with different meanings, but with the intention to have an appearance of connection to the past. Watch out for the promotion of the great books and a movement away from the master texts of classical education throughout history, which we know. Master texts include the works of Aristotle, the catechisms of the church, the sacred scriptures, the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas, the 7 classical liberal arts actually studied as arts from the masters themselves. Instead of that, watch out for the promotion of modern curriculum and endless literature that's somehow called classical, even though it has nothing to do with any historic Christian or Greco-Roman education. Watch for historical appeals with no evidence. Watch for historical appeals. Do the work of fact-checking. I'll try to offer a few insights as we go along. Watch for historical appeals that are simply false and misleading. Watch for a movement away from systematic formal instruction from master texts and a replacement of teacher-centered discussion in classes that really holds teachers accountable to no objective content of their discussions. Watch for these sorts of things. Watch for vague, general talk about education with no substance. These are the kind of things we should look for. Watch for ridiculous promises that no school can possibly fulfill. Watch for self-contradictions and so on. Watch for these common red flags as we go along. And again, as you watch this video, ask yourself, what is the substance of this education? What are the actual books? What are the actual subjects of the curriculum? What is this education that they're referring to? Let's go ahead and get started. We'll walk through this. Actually, before we get started, take a look at what you see. I told you that the Encyclopedia Britannica Great Book Series is the universal prop of the fake classical education movement. And here, I mean, it can't get any more exaggerated. We've got this opening, scanning of the Encyclopedia Britannica library. And look at the titles. Look how ridiculous this is to present this as classical education when every single name that's visible is a modern author. Yet somehow this is a classical education. So again, what in the world does this even mean? What is a classical education? Why would they be talking about classical education and show us a set of books that includes Newton, Locke, Rousseau, Adam Smith, Immanuel Kant, and so on? Why would this be presented as classical education when it is explicitly modern education? Okay, so to kick things off, we start with the Encyclopedia Britannica Great Book Series, which I told you is always used as a prop for this fake classical education movement. I've looked, this is the fourth video, and this set of books has been included in the videos for three of those videos so far, 3 out of 4. And the other one it wasn't in was actually an animated video and didn't actually have any real footage or video. So anyway, let's begin, starting off with a view of the Great Book Series that I told you to keep an eye out for, and we'll go through and see how things go at Hillsdale Academy. Notice the promise, cultivating students of virtue and wisdom. It's pretty high standards for a school. Let's see how things go.
The problem in education today is that it's abandoned the ground of education. Students today are taught
Lincoln,
that the truth is,
Adam Smith,
according to the perspective of one, that things in history are not fixed. That because we see them differently,
Jefferson, Lincoln,
they are different.
Nice
Most
office.
education today
History of
assumes
the
that the
United
student
States.
is the starting point.
There's a great deal of self-centeredness. There's a lack of civility, a lot of shouting, and a lack of
Another image
real
of Aristotle's
thoughtful
books.
interaction.
So that means the only thing wrong with education today is that it's lost its mission.
All right, let's just pause there for a minute. So we have this conclusion drawn at the end of this opening sequence, and the only thing wrong with education is that it's lost its mission. The only thing wrong with modern education is that it's lost its mission. Now, we haven't defined what modern education is. It's assumed that everyone knows what that means. And it's assumed that whatever this is presenting is not modern education. Okay, so modern education is an education that has lost its mission. The assumption is that whatever this program is offering is the true mission of education. But again, none of these things are defined. And that's why I say, I'd like you to watch this video and ask, what is the actual substance of this education? We've seen everything so far from images of the works of John Milton, Isaac Newton. We've seen the works of Aristotle. What is the mission? What is the mission? That's what I'd like you to ask. What is the substance? What is this non-modern education? What specifically is it? Or is this just spectacle and emotion? What is the substance of this education? So far, we're seeing lots of Americanism. A Patriot's Guide to American History, I think was the title. Here we see Franklin and Washington pictured behind an American flag. America was founded in the 18th century. America is not some kind of classical civilization. America is modern civilization. There was never a national democracy any time in world history. There was never a capitalist country any time in world history. We saw images of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations before, the source of capitalistic theory. There was never a democratic capitalistic country in the history of the world, anywhere in Christendom. How can the image of American culture be classical in any way? So let's keep an eye out for what exactly the significance is intended in this video from this academy of the meaning of this term classical. Let's keep an eye out.
I've become convinced that one of the greatest ways that I can impact the future is by investing in classical education and helping to cultivate students into men and women who are able to live virtuous and wise lives.
So again, notice we've had another reference to classical education. Still no definition of any kind. At least in the other videos, we started with what is classical education, and they attempted to start with a definition, which is reasonable. We're referring to classical education here with absolutely no context. Just lots of emotional music, spectacle of video and images, all kinds of slick editing, like I said. But what is classical education? What is it? Do we already know that? Does everyone know that? What is classical education? Let's keep going.
The classical model is not dead.
Okay, so real quickly, the classical model, it suggests that there is one model. The classical model is not dead. So this is assumed to be something that existed in the past, the classical model. And Hillsdale Academy is assuring us that, contrary to what people may think, it's not dead. In other words, it's living here. So we still haven't received a definition of any kind or any substance. We've had complaints about modern education, a conclusion that modern education has lost its way, and now an assertion that the classical model is not dead, which is a direct historical appeal. Something existed in the past which is restored or preserved here in this school. Well, let's find out what it is. What is this classical model?
At Hillsdale Academy, our motto is Virtus et Sapientia, which is Latin for virtue and wisdom. And that really is the backbone of what we do here, and it's really the backbone of what a classical education is all about.
Okay, so we have classical education is about virtue and wisdom. I'd agree with that. Okay, virtue and wisdom is the end of classical education. Okay.
In America today,
What's the
I think
substance?
often think of education as
So a Latin
training
class
for a
there.
particular career or a particular course of life. A classical education is more well-rounded than that, and it remembers that no matter who you are, there's a moral education, a character education, a civic education.
And so what we're doing
All right, so we'll stop there. No mention of religion, right? No mention of religion. It's like the previous video. It's just moralism, right? It's virtue. It's about wisdom. It's all these vague terms, right? It's about learning a certain way of life, civic duties, things like that. So is that what education was about in the past? There was a model of education in the past that covered the things that this woman mentioned. Let's go back and listen to what she says
For a
again.
particular course of life. A classical education is more well-rounded than that.
So it's well-rounded, okay? So it's a well-rounded education. It's not for a particular purpose in life, a particular, occupation or something like that. It's well-rounded. So does the mission of the classical education become more clear by defining it or describing it as well-rounded? What does well-rounded mean? It means being good at everything. So in the past, classical education promoted this idea of being good at everything. How specifically is that pursued? Let's keep listening.
And it remembers that no matter who you are, there's a moral education, a character
Moral,
education, a civic
character,
education.
civic.
And so what we're doing in the classical
religion.
education tradition is we are drawing on the wisdom of the ages. We are exposing our students to the wisdom.
All right, notice all of the images here. We're drawing on the wisdom of the ages with this classical education, this tradition of education. We're drawing on the wisdom of the ages. So here's an example of what this means. The Tempest by William Shakespeare. That's a 16th century play. No one before the 16th century, Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, any biblical character, saints before the 1500s, Thomas Aquinas, St. Francis, St. Dominic, none of them had anything to do with William Shakespeare. It's a modern work. The Tempest by William Shakespeare.
Wisdom that has gone before.
Augustine's Confessions. Okay, so here we have an early church work by a doctor of the church. That's great, obviously, right? Where does that fit? Where do the Confessions of St. Augustine fit in the curriculum? Where were the Confessions studied in schools throughout Christian history? Were the Confessions studied in the history of the church at school? No, they weren't. There's one example in history I can think of where we see the Confessions, and it's Saint Teresa of Avila. While she's going through her difficult times in life, one of the books she studied as an adult nun in the Carmelite order were the Confessions. But the Confessions were never part of a formal school program at any time in history. So we see Shakespeare, we see the Confessions, and again, this is all about literature. This is great book stuff. We read the Confessions. We don't get the education that St. Augustine received. We don't get the education that William Shakespeare received. We read William Shakespeare's books. We read St. Augustine's books. But what about the education of the authors? What about the education? We're going to hear talk about scientists, I'm sure, and wise men, all kinds of great innovators and things like that. But you notice how we miss the question of how were they educated? Not what did they write, but how were they educated? This is a school, after all. This isn't a library or a reading club. This is the formal school. What was the formal education that St. Augustine received? What was the formal education that Shakespeare received? I know what it was. But I don't think these schools know what it was, because they're just reading the works of these authors. They're not studying or imitating the education of these authors. Let's keep going.
So we don't get to make up truth. Just as there are laws that govern the physical universe, there are also moral laws.
One of the challenges of education is forming virtue.
Let's back up for 1 second there.
There are laws
Look at
that
the
govern
structure of the
physical universe.
classroom.
There are also moral laws.
One of the challenges of education is...
You see this image of the classroom, I missed it there, but the image is this sitting in this round table setup where the students all face each other, because these are classes intended for discussion. This is not a lecture hall where a master teacher provides students with instruction that they need so that they can learn the arts and sciences as efficiently as possible. This is a democratic classroom. It's a discussion place. And the teacher is simply the facilitator of discussions among the students. Has that ever been done in the history of education? If so, show me where, because I don't believe it was ever done in history. So here we have a personal testimony from some parents.
forming virtue in its students. And this is something the Academy excels at.
Things like fortitude, perseverance, prudence. These good virtues are tested at school on a daily basis.
So
I
virtues
learned the
again,
importance of responsibility and being able to
geography class.
take care of the people around me.
Here we have, it looks like it looks like an English grammar class. So we have a teacher with English grammar.
From Plato's Academy on.
These kids even have tea at the table. That's pretty cool, actually. I don't mind that.
Over the centuries, learning has happened in community.
All right. Now there was a historical statement that you probably missed. Listen to what this guy has to say. This is the headmaster of the school.
Plato's Academy onward, over the centuries, learning has happened in community.
From Plato's Academy onward, learning has happened in community. Now, that sounds great, and if you're a parent, I would be willing to bet that you don't know a whole lot about Plato's Academy. Plato lived and taught in the 4th century BC. How many people watching this video, how many teachers in this school know anything about Plato's Academy? But we're assured here by this headmaster that ever since Plato's Academy, apparently, am I allowed to assume that this tradition began with Plato's Academy? Or did Plato's Academy start something new? Or was Plato's Academy itself a continuation of ancient learning? But let me just tell you something about Plato's Academy. First of all, Plato's Academy was not a school. Plato's Academy was not a place for kids receiving a formal education. Plato's Academy was an adult philosophical learning center, we could say, where men, not women, I think in the history of Plato's Academy, there were only a couple women who ever attended. But Plato's Academy was a philosophical school where men gathered together to study the classical liberal arts and philosophy. So Plato's Academy has absolutely nothing to do with any formal school model intended for children. Plato's Academy was not a school. It was an adult philosophy club. You might think of it as something like that. So to start with Plato's Academy, again, there's just this assumed knowledge, historical appeal, and it's completely misleading because we're looking at a formal K-12 school here. We're looking at kids receiving their formal education. And we're told that this is a continuation in some way that we can trace back to Plato's Academy in ancient Athens. And the reality is that's completely false. This has nothing to do with what Plato's Academy was. Plato's Academy was not a school for children. It was a learning center or a philosophy club for men only, and not free or noble men. It wasn't even a school that was open to the common people, certainly wasn't open to girls, certainly didn't have women teaching in the classroom. So again, while I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having women teaching, I'm asking, what does anything in this picture right here have to do with Plato's Academy? The answer is nothing. It has nothing to do with Plato's Academy. Just another one of these misleading historical appeals that I guess the audience is just assumed to understand. It's sophistry. That's what it is.
And what we have at Hillsdale Academy is a community of learners. Our students, our teachers, our staff, everyone working together to promote the cultivation of virtue and wisdom in our students.
Our daughter Helen, in a given semester, she's learning Shakespearean drama, competed in cross country, played violin in the orchestra. This was not a girl that was stressed out about filling up a resume with activities that she could burnish her resume with to get into the college she wanted to. She was just loving her friendships and all of these things.
Mm-hmm. So here we go. We can see what's being promoted here. She's not stressed out by any kind of formal study program or rigorous school culture. She's making friends. She was studying Shakespeare, participating in club sports, and playing the violin, I think he said. So we've got music classes, instrumental music classes, not theoretical music classes. We've got literature studies, modern literature studies, and we've got social activities. We've got social activities. What is the substance, again, what is the substance of the classical education? I understand social life, but that's got nothing to do with classical education. Listen again to the benefits described by this parent.
Students.
Our daughter Helen, in a given semester, she's learning Shakespearean drama, competed in cross country, played violin in the orchestra. This was not a girl that was stressed out about filling up a resume with activities that she could burnish her resume with to get into the college she wanted to. She was just loving her friendships and all of these
Social
things.
life.
And I just see that and think, wow.
It has truly been a joy to watch our children learn to love to learn.
There hardly is a day that goes by that we are not looking at each other with a kind of giddiness of gratitude for having the academy here.
For this tiny school that has had 303 graduates for 21 years straight, we had at least one student in the National Merit Program. There was one year that in a class, I think of 19, we had 5 National Merit finalists.
I had 3 different.
Now let me just say something about this. Okay, so we go through these beautiful, notice the self-contradiction here. We go through this talk about how the daughter just enjoyed her social life, wasn't worried about burnishing her resume with any kind of activities that would help her with college admission. We were told that we're not concerned with training kids for jobs and occupations and things like that, but a well-rounded education. You hear this vague talk about loving learning and all this, and then we switch to talk about SAT scores and national merit finalists. So which is it? Are these modern criteria not important, or are they important and we just end up right back at those things? And let me say something about it, this talk about national merit finalists, just to put this in perspective as to how ridiculous this talk is about this stuff. National merit finalists have to do with scores earned on the PSAT test, which is taken in 10th grade or so. So you've got this so-called classical school obviously carefully selected student body, right? These schools are accused by many of just being racist, because you'll notice that the students are all either conservative white kids or they're minorities who look and act like white kids. But we come down again to talk about college admission and standardized test scores. And let me just say this. I was a public school student. My parents had virtually nothing to do with my education. I walked to school, went to school by myself, went through classes that I really had no idea what I was doing. I graduated from high school. From my public high school, I graduated with a 2.3 grade point average, 2.3 GPA. I was the class clown of my public high school. I mean that literally. I was elected class clown of my high school. Edison High School, 1993, I was the class clown. 2.3 grade point average. I was a national merit semifinalist. National merit semifinalist. So I understand that the woman in that previous scene is talking about having a number of national merit finalists. But I just want to put this in perspective. A totally neglected student. Neither of my parents went to college. They were both working class people, completely uninvolved in my education. Public school kid, class clown, 2.3 GPA. I was a national merit semifinalist. So what is the value of that award? A kid who is a class clown, 2.3 GPA, terrible student. I never, and this is explicitly true, I never read a book before college. Never. I never read a book. All of the high school classes, all of the English classes, all of the required reading, all the assigned reading, I never read a single book. Before I got into college, and I couldn't even name books that I read in college, almost all of my studies came through my Christian life and my interest in learning for the sake of my own intellectual and spiritual life. I received almost no formal education, and I was a national merit semifinalist. So I'm like knocking on the door of these kids who are supposedly receiving this elite classical education, descending from Plato's Academy. I was a street kid, public school educated, class clown, 2.3 GPA. I was a national merit semifinalist. How does that become an honorable achievement in some private school? It's the standards are so low, and we still have not addressed the question of what is the substance of this classical education. We have a girl looking through a microscope. What does this have to do with classical education? We still haven't got any substance with regard to the curriculum of this school. What is it? What do these kids study? I've heard Shakespeare. We've seen some literature. We've got all these great pics of the laboratories and some kid looking through a microscope. What are they actually studying?
In high school who have their PhD, which I feel like is very rare.
This is not a place that teachers pass through. It's a destination. It's where they want to stay.
So teachers have
build their career,
PhDs,
put down their roots,
academic
and really
degrees.
invest long term in Hillsdale Academy, in Hillsdale College, and in their students.
It's not an elite school. It's not a prep school. What it is a school that holds the bar high.
Okay, here we have it looks like a Latin class. I see some Latin on the board. Not sure exactly what the intention of that class would be.
So that we can produce the best sorts of citizens that our country needs.
So it's not just about our little school in Hillsdale. Suddenly it's quite big. This is for the sake of our nation for the sake of just government and self-governance, everything that our country was founded on.
We still haven't talked
As
about
Hillsdale
the classical
College's
model.
work in K-12 classical education continues to expand.
Now there we had an explicit reference to K-12 classical education. And remember, the K-12 system was invented in the American public schools in the 1850s. The K-12 system of education has absolutely nothing to do with the history of education. The K-12 education is based on compulsory education laws that were invented in the 1800s that never existed. So K-12 classical is, this is the kind of stuff that makes my brain want to explode. K-12 classical. Classical is one system of learning that existed all through history. K-12 was a system, or I should say, a model of schooling that was invented in the 19th century. What in the world is K-12 classical? It doesn't even make any sense.
Academy will continue to play an incredibly important role in that mission. We want to continue growing as a school, becoming better at the education we provide, continuing to expand our facilities to meet the needs of our student enrollment growth, so that we can better serve the mission of Hillsdale College and serve our country as a model of what classical education can and should be.
What is classical education?
The Academy is an excellent thing, and it needs to be. And so for it to be an excellent thing, it needs to be funded to a sufficient level. Education for the young is for people who are not making a living yet. Somebody has to help them. And so that partnership between the people who support it and the people who carry on its activity, that's natural and necessary.
By supporting Hillsdale Academy, you are helping Hillsdale College.
Oh, so this is getting into a financial
teach
appeal.
K through 12 schools across the country what a beautiful classical education looks like and how education in this country ought to be done.
Pledge of Allegiance. Okay.
We're not in this to make money. We are in this to serve the students who walk the halls of our buildings, to bless their families, but also to bless and contribute to our nation and their world.
We
There's
are
been
very
no talk of
aware
religion.
that the donors have supported that education for our family.
I was sponsored myself by a woman in Florida who decided that classical education was
So this
important.
is turning into
Because of Mrs. McCullum,
an appeal to donors.
I was able to go to high school.
Private school.
Through coaching basketball, coaching soccer, and doing tutoring, I've still kept a connection to the school. And I think what keeps drawing me back is I've started to realize more and more what Hillsdale Academy has given to me and how much of an impact Hillsdale Academy has had on my life.
The reach that Hillsdale Academy has had across our nation.
Now, I talk about this once in a while, but these kind of social issues, these things have nothing to do with schooling. This have nothing to do with an academy of any kind. All of these things are available outside of school, separate from school, and there is actually a more natural and, I would argue, a better source for these things. For example, the center of our social life is not supposed to be a private school. It's supposed to be the parish. We're supposed to have family life, or we talk about family, family, family. The family is supposed to be the place, like the Catechism teaches, the family is a place that's proper for the learning of virtue. So if virtue and wisdom are the end of the education, why do we need to separate children from family life? It doesn't make any sense. The home, the family community, is already well suited to the cultivation of virtue. We don't need to leave home to go to a school to learn virtue. That doesn't make any sense. We already have virtue available at home. We're seeing pictures of things like sports and choir, music practice, and things like that. Those things themselves have nothing to do with schooling. My daughter goes to dance lessons. She studies ballet in a private ballet school. We don't care if her academic program or school provides her with ballet lessons, and they wouldn't be anywhere nearly as good as a private ballet school. If we wanted to have our sons play sports, the place to learn how to play sports is not at a school. No great athletes learn to play sports by going to school. They play in private leagues. I grew up playing baseball, football, basketball. You learn to play sports in private leagues, private recreational leagues, on private teams, on traveling all-star teams that play through the summer, on AAU basketball teams that travel and play together throughout the year in basketball. No one sends a child to a school to learn how to play a sport. And I've talked about this quite a bit because schools will advertise all of these achievements of students that come from their own private lives and that are not actually being produced by the school. And this leaves us with the question still, what does the actual school do? What does the actual school actually teach? We've heard classical education mentioned a dozen times. We still have no idea what they're talking about when they use the phrase classical education. There's no substance in this. And this is just normal, modern school marketing. And this is what I want you to see. This is the fake classical education movement. You can take this and you can Catholicize it, or you can Protestantize it, but all of the essentials of the fake classical education movement are visible in this video. Absolutely no curriculum content. Maybe we'll get to that. I don't know. I haven't watched this. There's no curriculum content. It's emphasized all kinds of private student skills and interest. It's emphasized social life. We've seen very clearly that it's American, American, American. We've seen American flags, kids saying the Pledge of Allegiance, political science classes. All the men are in, jackets and ties. They look like good conservative Republicans. Is that what classical education is? Is this just an excuse to promote conservative American culture and present it as some kind of ancient system of learning that's being restored? Because there's no such thing. Let's keep going.
Educational impact is enormous.
It's got a mission to prepare citizens to be entrepreneurs and to raise families and to help with other organizations, because that's the backbone of a free society.
Civic and political, playing tic-tac-toe, sports.
I can think of no better way to invest in the future than by investing in the classical education of our young men and women. What classical schools like Hillsdale Academy are doing is cultivating students so that they can live well and so that they can pass on what they have learned to future generations. A classical Christian education is an investment in eternity.
And then we conclude, good grief, we conclude with this message, an investment in Hillsdale Academy. I mean, listen to this. Sending your money to Hillsdale Academy is, get this, an investment in eternity. An investment in Hillsdale Academy is an investment in eternity. Wow. That's quite a message, huh? If you're interested in eternity and you've got some money, what you need to do is invest that money in Hillsdale Academy, because an investment in Hillsdale Academy is an investment in eternity. That's pretty bold to say something like that. I mean, I can't imagine promoting the Classical Liberal Arts Academy and looking into a camera and telling parents that investing in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, investing your money in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy is an investment in eternity. I can't even imagine saying something like that. In my mind, I'm a Catholic man. In my mind, if we're going to start talking about eternity, we had better be talking about the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is the institution on earth that has something to do with eternity. If you want to invest in eternity, let me make this very clear. If you want to invest in eternity, you should invest your money in the Catholic Church. That's where you should put your money if you'd like to invest in eternity. And I know people will talk about scandals and all that stuff, but it's exaggerated nonsense. If you want to invest in eternity, you should not be sending your money all over this academic landscape, investing in a school where kids read Shakespeare, play sports, hang out with their friends, say the Pledge of Allegiance every 10 minutes or so, and look like good white American Republicans. That's got nothing to do with eternity. But you see the claims and the promises that they're going to produce virtuous citizens. I don't understand what Christ came into the world for when the production of this heaven on earth is available by simply reading some books and playing sports. I don't understand what the purpose of the sacramental life is. If we can raise virtuous, wise people without any of the sacraments. No mention of the gospel, no mention of Christianity, no mention of the Catholic Church. What we have here is exactly what America is. America is a scam whereby people tell us that they are preserving some ancient tradition when in fact they're rebelling against the truth of the Catholic faith. Invest in Hillsdale Academy and invest in eternity. What a claim, huh? So that was an 8.5-minute video. Like I said at the beginning, and just to get back to this beginning so we remember where we came from, this great image of the Encyclopedia Britannica great book series. We went through this 8.5 minutes. We heard the terms classical education used again and again and again. We never once had any substantial information, no talk about any curriculum. We had some bizarre reference to Plato's Academy, which, as I explained, has absolutely nothing to do with this. We saw use of the phrase K-12 classical education, which is mind-blowing historically. I mean, I can't understand how anyone can, what I hope is that they actually think this is true. I give them the benefit of the doubt that they think that what they're doing is good. And again, like I say in all these videos, I'm not judging anyone personally. I'm not saying that any of these people are bad or that they're liars or anything like that. I'm not saying that their school, sending your kid to this school is better than sending your kid to a private school. That may very well be true. I'm not saying that this school, in terms of modern education, considering options that are available, is not better than other options. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is this desire to market the school by talking about some kind of classical civilization that is being heroically fought for in this modern school is just craziness. I don't understand how marketing can be any more misleading and groundless than this continued exploitation of the phrase classical education and all that comes with it. What we see here is a study of the great books, which means a conservative European focus on a limited number of authors who represent this American democratic capitalistic culture. Like I said, you see right here you see Adam Smith. That's The Wealth of Nations. That's the book on capitalism. You see John Locke. He's the Enlightenment thinker. Isaac Newton, the material scientist. We see these modern names, and yet for some reason, we've got this desire to pretend that this is somehow associated with something historical and timeless. And it's no such thing. It's simply a conservative European capitalistic private school that is using this video to try and attract some capitalistic European conservative donors to give to the school, assuring them that their gifts to Hillsdale Academy are some kind of indulgences that can be considered investments in eternity. That's what this fake classical education movement is all about. It's about Eurocentric, conservative, capitalist, American culture being promoted among students. And you might sit there and think, well, what exactly is wrong with that? You know, I consider myself to be a European, conservative, capitalist, American. What's wrong with such a school? Well, what happened to Catholic? What happened to Christian? That's the problem with these schools. And I know what the Catholic classical schools will do is they will simply take this, and they will add to it Catholicism. And then they will use all this same language, classical education. They'll talk about Thomas Aquinas and the saints and all this kind of stuff. But here's the difference. In the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, we start with the actual classical Catholic curriculum. We can put on top of that anything we want. We can put some conservative, capitalistic, European Americanism on top of the real classical Catholic curriculum. That would be fine. I'd have no problem with that. Like I said, I'd consider myself to be at least part of those things. I'm European in descent. I would consider myself to be morally conservative, though definitely much more of a moderate than most Christians that I know. I would consider myself to be capitalistic in that I recognize the need for a free market in American society. I'm certainly an American. I have patriotic obligations. I've got 3 kids in the military. So there's nothing wrong with that. But the question is, what is the actual substance? They talk about foundation, tradition, classical education, but what is the actual education? And what my argument is, if you were to look, you would find that this is just a facade. It's a shallow political academic program. I don't even want to say academic program. It's a conservative, capitalistic, European cultural program that makes use of the school as the place where it Americanizes its students, where it molds its students into this European, capitalistic, conservative, Republican, American adult. That's what it is. And again, I'm not saying anything is intrinsically wrong with that. But what it has nothing to do with classical education. It has no real substance in terms of curriculum. It has no intellectual connection with any Catholic or Greco-Roman philosophical tradition. It's just this facade. And when we take this and we bring it into Catholic communities, this is the fake classical education movement, and we simply overlay it with some Catholic stuff. We put some Catholic images in the classroom so that instead of, okay, every picture can't be some American statesman. Let's at least get some pictures of saints on the walls and make it look and feel Catholic. But if we look at the men on the walls, if we look at Thomas Jefferson, if we look at Benjamin Franklin, if we look at any of the saints, St. Augustine, William Shakespeare, not a saint but an author I mentioned before, why don't we ask this question? How were those men educated? We're talking about schooling here. The reason why we don't ask that question is that these schools really aren't interested in the mission of schools. They can criticize modern schools and say they've lost their mission. This school commits the same fault. This school is an Americanizing school. This school does not serve the mission of true classical Catholic education. The mission of this school is political. They criticize the modern schools because they say that their mission is financial or occupational. The mission of this school is simply political. This is not the purpose of education. The true purpose of classical Catholic education is to know God. And that's true whether you're studying Aristotle or Thomas Aquinas. Aristotle was seeking to know God. That's what he was doing. That's what metaphysics is about. Metaphysics is to philosophy what theology is to divine revelation. Aristotle was seeking to know God. He was seeking to understand the order in the world. He was seeking to understand the soul and the moral life. He was seeking to understand the mind and the intellectual life. That entire intellectual foundation is absent in this fake classical education movement. This video gives you an idea of what it's really about. And all of the talk of Catholicism, all the talk of classical education, it's just a bunch of baloney. It's an American conservative political, cultural institution that's simply trying to raise kids that vote for the candidates and the issues that we want them to vote for. That's what this is. It's a facade and a sham that claims to have some kind of vision beyond American politics, and that's simply false. It's entirely limited to American politics. So I hope that was helpful. That was a walk through this video by Hillsdale Academy, Cultivating Students of Virtue and Wisdom, which really should be retitled Cultivating Conservative, Republican, Capitalist Americans. That's what this is really about. Don't be deceived by the fake classical education movement. The red flags are obvious, and we can simply ask, is this what the saints studied in history? Obviously not. I hope that's helpful. God bless.